At least one more person. Let's see. All right, I'm just going to start talking because we don't have that much time. So, dear students, welcome to another class on Marx. Last time we discussed Marx's general concepts. We talked about exploitation, about his structure theory. And with that, we established probably the strongest part of Marxism, right? It's Guillermo is disagreeing with me.
A las 8:40 de la mañana.
All right. What was I saying? Tuesday we discussed probably the strongest part of Marxism. Today we're going to discuss something that is a bit more contestable, let's say, right? It's not just straight up facts about society, it's a bit more imaginative. We're going to talk about the part of revolution and beyond that. So, we start by talking about the revolution and how Marx saw the future, right? Because Marx is just not wishing for a revolution, he's actually promising it. So, Marx, just like Hegel, was quite enthused about the French Revolution. He thought this was a good thing. He thought this was interesting, as well as other revolutions, the American Revolution, whatever colonial revolutions you had around the world. Yet, he didn't think this was enough. He wisely pointed out that the French Revolution was mainly a political change, a change in how the laws worked, how the constitution worked. For most people, their life was the same. Before the French Revolution, you would get up at 5 a.m. and start working for 15 hours for the Lord. And after the French Revolution, you got up at 5 a.m. and started working for 15 hours for the capitalist. But your day roughly looked the same, right? The same drag that you had to go through. So we said, what do we need? It's not just a political revolution. We need a socio-economical revolution. We don't need a new master. We need to get rid of the master, right? A lot of revolutions are people getting a new master. Marx's revolution is getting rid of the whole master system, right? The goal of it, of what he wanted, what he was preaching for, the goal of it is to end exploitation itself, to get rid of the capitalist class. Who's going to do that? It is going to be the proletariat. Marx put his fate in the hand of the working class. He said historically the working class is the class that's going to win, right? And this constant war, they're on the losing foot now, but history works in a way that advantages them, that at the end they will be victorious and they will establish the dictatorship of the proletariat. And now some of you are going to say, teacher, you said he was a Democrat, but he's talking about dictatorship, right? That's true. He's talking about dictatorship. But you have to remember who the proletariat is. Proletariat is 80–90% of the people, right? So in other words, he's talking about absolute democracy, right? He wants the rule of 80–90% of the population. In other words, democracy. That's what he means with this. It just means that the proletariat is going to enforce, let's say, their rule, thus the rule of the absolute majority on the country. And the point of all of this, right? How are we going to end exploitation via the rising of the proletariat is to create a classless society. A society where there only is one class. There's no class that are the workers. Everybody works, everybody gets paid, nobody gets exploited, right? That's the idea. We all contribute our labor to the system without anyone in particular getting exploited by it. And he said, we need to do this by a revolution. We need to unite. This is his famous call of action, last words. This is also written on his grave. Workers of all nations unite. Because Marx, very smart man, Marx understood that the real thing that's stopping the workers is division, right? The easiest way to keep power is to divide the opposition. And the same goes for social relationships. Capitalism is a system that puts us in competition with each other. Me against my co-workers for promotion, right? You against other students when you graduate. But you are constantly kept in a competition with each other, which blinds you from seeing that if you would unite, you could all win, right? To tell you a little short story, just to get the class started. I told you Marx's daughter was also involved in politics, right? She founded the Labour Party, but she was also involved in unions. And one of the fights she was involved in was the fight of the dock workers of London, of the port, of the harbour. Now, dock work was extremely hard. You didn't just have hard labor conditions, they had day contracts, which means that in the morning you had to go to the docks, stand outside the gate, jump up and down, and hope that somebody would, Hunger Games like come out and pick you to work that day. But maybe they didn't pick you, maybe they picked the guy next to you, and then you had no work, right? This is terrible. So they decide to go on a strike. But it was very difficult because people got paid by the day, so nobody had savings, right? So the workers were 2 weeks into the strike. They were all going hungry. The police was constantly attacking them because the police was on the side of the capitalists. So they were 1 day away from giving up and being defeated and having to have even lower wages. But then something magical happened. They got a check, not from Marx or Engels, but from the Australian Federation of Dock Workers. So the workers in London received money all the way from Australia, from workers on the other side, literal other side of the world, to support them. They cleared that check, they bought food, and now they could last for another 2 weeks. The dock couldn't afford another 2 weeks without workers, and they won the fight. They got high wages, they got longer contracts. Right? That's what solidarity can do for you. Once you can see the power of people actually uniting, which they're not likely to do, but if they do it, they will win every time. Marx understood this. Now, he didn't just say that we should do this. He didn't say, oh, we should have a revolution. No, he promised it. His idea was not that the revolution should happen. His idea is that it's going to happen because he believes that the collapse of capitalism is inevitable. Why does he think that? Well, because he's a Hegelian. You have to remember, Hegelians think in these terms of that history is a bunch of processes that each have their problems. You know, those problems come reactions to those processes, and then we learn from that, and blah 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 blah. Right? He thought the same for capitalism. He says capitalism is better than the last system. It solved some of the problems of the feudal system, but it has its own problems. It is full of contradictions. Capitalism is full of bubbles, you might imagine. It's a bit like if you have a plastified surface, like a folder or something, and it has this little air bubble under that. That's never going to go away. If anything, the bubble is going to get bigger, right? He says, well, capitalism is like this. Capitalism has all kind of bubbles in it, and they're just going to grow and grow and grow. These are inherent problems with that, whether they're ecological or whether they are economical or social. These bubbles are going to keep growing, and all the revolution is just piercing the bubble, right? The revolution doesn't create the change. Revolution just initiates it. But the inherent instability, the thing that makes it burst, that comes from within capitalism, he thought. So it's gonna happen sooner or later, right? We get to decide when we pierce the bubble, when we sting it, that's on us. But the fact that it's a bubble, that's just historically gonna happen. Now, he has quite an elaborate theory from this. Is whole books about why this is going to happen. But to super summarize it, there are three main reasons, right? It's what is sometimes called the Marxist tripod of change. The tripod is this little thing that you put your camera on. It's something with 3 legs, right? So his idea of a revolution is standing on 3 legs. He says this is why it's going to happen, not why I want it to happen, but why it's going to happen. 3 reasons. 1, capitalism will get in a crisis. 2, the consciousness of the proletariat will grow. And 3, capitalism will grow in itself the institutions, the tools of this new world. I'm going to discuss all of these separate. And I'm going to keep talking. Assuming you can hear me clearly. Had some network problems earlier.
We hear you clearly, Doctor.
Good. Then I'll keep rambling. We start with crisis. This is the one that Marx is most famous for and that he wrote most about. Now, what I'm telling you here is one slide, right? This is a lot. These are whole 1000-page books, yeah, that I'm summarizing on one slide here. He has a lot of different theories of crisis. There are dozens of reasons why he thinks capitalism is economically unsustainable. Yeah. And it's really not more complex than I'm going to explain here. I'm going to explain you his most famous theory. The one that he thinks, well, the one that makes him more unique, because a lot of the things he says, other people said too, right? This is more typically from Marx. This is one of his main theories of economic crisis. Because he thinks, not thinks, he knows that capitalism is inherently unstable economically. It's a very dynamic system. It's a system that works, but it has inherent flaws, and it creates a crisis every now so often, right? And that's simply true. We are right now in one, right? 10 years ago, we were in one, 2008. Then in 95, we were in one, etc., etc., etc. Basically, every 10, 15 years, you have this crisis. And Marx thinks that this all accumulates into one giant crisis. And this is his idea in short, very summarized, badly summarized. So what does Marx think? One thing he sees is that capitalism will naturally lead to monopoly. Capitalism is based on competition between different actors, but that competition itself creates its opposite. Because in competition, right, 2 companies competing against each other, one is going to win. So the stronger companies are going to win, and they're not just going to win, typically they're going to buy the loser. So you see in many markets that they naturally gravitate towards monopoly the longer time goes on. You can clearly see these online, right? Microsoft bought Skype, Google bought YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And so the market is always getting smaller and smaller and smaller because these companies, the winner will buy the loser, and you just get concentration of power. Yes. That's one element. The other element is overproduction. Overproduction is in nobody's interest as a whole, right? Because you create more than you can sell. But why does it happen? Because companies, again, are in competition with each other. And if you're competing, nobody's competing for the fun of it, right? If you're competing to win. If I'm going to compete, if I'm going to put my capital on the line, I'm not going to do that unless I think I can win. So since I'm assuming I'm going to win, because otherwise I wouldn't do it in the first place, I need to produce to win, right? I need to produce more than I sold today to sell more tomorrow, if you understand that. Yeah. So everybody is producing a little bit more than they can actually sell because they're all thinking that tomorrow they're going to beat their competition and take their market share. You can clearly see this in supermarkets. Supermarkets always have more food than they can sell. Very unfrequently you have a shortage of food, but on average you have a surplus of food in the supermarket and have to throw 5 to 20% of their food away each week. That's overproduction, right? You can see the same with car factories. Car factories always have a lot of cars standing outside of them. Probably they won't sell them, but just in case somebody wants them, right? And they beat competition, they have them. So that means that as a whole, capitalism is structurally overproducing stuff that they can't sell. This ties into so point A, B, and C are going to come together now. C is that they're always going to try to make more profits, right? And they're going to produce more for the same money to keep this overproduction going. How do you do that? You do that by having more machines, which creates unemployment. I'm going to give a whole lecture on just this at the end of the course. So I'm not going to explain that further now. And you're going to try to pay your workers less, because then they make the same for less money, thus you can hire more workers, therefore you can produce more, right? So this is going to generate overproduction. The problem is that your workers are going to be worse off. They're going to have less money, or they're not going to have a job at all. That is fun for you on the short term, because you make more for less money. However, you now have more stuff, but who's going to buy that stuff, right? Depends a bit on what you're making, but if they're basic goods and nobody has a job or nobody earns enough to buy these goods, now you start getting a problem, because who's going to generate the demand? You have increasingly less players with increasingly more stuff, with increasingly less money in the market to buy it. So you're going to have a fall in profits because less people buy stuff. Then the companies have to fire more people because they have less money or lower their wages. Therefore, people can buy less stuff. Therefore, companies have less money. They fire more people. They buy less stuff. They fire more people. And the whole thing goes down the drain. More or less like the 2008 crisis, right? Now, this can be survived on once, and capitalism is quite good at you just kill some people, right? People die of hunger. Ah, well, the rest carries on. But this leaves a scar. And each time it does, it leaves a deeper scar on the economy. And Marx thinks that at some day, these scars are going to end up and we won't be able to survive the next crisis. And this partly happened in 1930, right? Capitalism was saved, but at great cost. And many times Marx's prediction is almost coming true, and then like World War II happens or something like that, or World War I happens. So capitalism has been saved by the bell many times. Second leg of the tripod is this theory of class consciousness. Here the idea is that capitalism is going to produce an ever more conscious working class. You have to remember, capitalism literally produces the working class, right? How does it do that? Well, it draws farmers to the cities. So people used to work on the land for the lords, but now the lords lost their power and the economy is shifting more towards production rather than agriculture. So more and more people don't have a life on the countryside, and thus they go to the cities to find work, right? Some of your parents or grandparents are in that situation. And capitalism will always also keep recruiting formerly independent craftsmen. So you had a smith who would make nails, but he can no longer compete with now the nail factory. So he can do nothing else but to go work in the nail factory, right? And that keeps drawing people to the cities and massing them together in neighborhoods. And this is going to start forming a class of people, right? They work together during the day in the factory on the work floor. They live in the same neighborhood. They go to the same struggles. They go to the same church. And this is going to start forming group consciousness, right? Workers are going to more and more understand that they're in the same boat, that they're the same people. They're going to more and more start understanding that their fate is connected, like the Australian workers who helped the British workers overcome and win these fights. And every time they win, they're going to learn how they won. They're going to learn that they won through solidarity. And this is different because the working class, we sometimes use it as a synonym for the poor, but they're not the same thing. Actually, Marx sharply distinguishes them. Working class is poor, but not all people are working class, right? Homeless people are not working class. Poor people are a group that's just defined by the fact that nobody wants to be in the group, right? A working class is a class. They share a lot more. That they share a certain culture, for example. They share a lot more than just not having money, right? So over time, Marx predicts, the workers will learn, become stronger, and become more organized, rack up victories, learn from that, get leaders, have better theory. His theory is like, finally, they can understand what's happening to them, right? Just read my book. If you could read, damn it, they cannot read. We need education first, right? They're learning these kind of things. And at some point, they're going to realize that they have to unite, and then they're going to rise up. And if they do, they will inherit the earth. And that is true. Every time they did, they won. This is probably Marx's weakest point. Because one thing, I'm going to criticize this for a second. One thing he really underestimated is how good capitalism is in tricking people, in distracting people, in having them fight wars against each other, right? For the country, or I know, Napoleon independent or whatever. They find a good way to divide people over nonsense. Or capitalism is also very good in making people dream about things they are not, right? For example, in Mexico, the big problem with this idea is that, so in reality, only 12% of people are middle class, if you look at income scales. However, over 60% of the population think they are middle class. So there's an enormous disconnect between class and class consciousness, right? The majority of the population is simping with a group they are not. So that really hinders you understanding what's in your own interest, right? Because you always like, but what if I was rich? Yeah, but you're not. Yeah, but what if I was, right? People really think like this. And I think Marx a little bit underestimated how conscious people were going to be about things. But anyway, it did happen, right? Revolutions happened. Some people gained class consciousness and they fought and won every time. Unless America crushed them. And number 3 is the most difficult one to understand. Is this idea of new institutions, is the idea that capitalism has problems, right? Many problems. Some of those problems capitalism can control, or at least postpone. And in order to control them, it's going to have to come up with reactions to it, right? So problems arise, capitalist society needs to protect itself. It needs to come up with some type of answer to that. And through that, capitalism is going to grow the institutions, going to grow the policies, going to grow the tools that socialism, that communism can use to build a new world. So capitalism is going to grow the answers to itself within it, in a sense. For example, in order to control things, capitalist countries, we saw this with absolute monarchy, grew a strong state, right? That is better than the feudalist state. So they're going to grow a state, they're going to grow bureaucracy, taxes, etc., to organize things, which gives the workers a very clear goal. We need to capture the state, right? Because that's where all the power is. So capitalism set up. Capitalism created cities. They drew people all to the same spot. If people are all in the same place, it's a lot easier to organize them, right? So capitalism here again is creating the conditions for the revolution by concentrating the working class. Capitalism comes with a big boost in science and technology, which is good for the revolution because it's easier to do communism if you have technology. It's easier with electricity than without it, right? Because workers have more tools to build their new state. Science is going to help fight religion or other things that is holding the workers back, right? So Marx said, okay, this is good, right? Capitalism is developing the very tools, the very knife that we're going to stab them with. An example of today, capitalism created, well, not capitalism, the government did. But suppose it was capitalism, right? That's the alternative history here. Let's suppose capitalism invented the internet. They didn't, the state did, but okay. The internet is a kind of potentially inherently anti-capitalist place, right? It's a natural common. It's like the sea. It's a place where if I lend you a book, then I don't have the book anymore. If I lend you a PDF, I still have the PDF, right? It's a place, it's inherently communist. You can share stuff without consequence, right? Capitalism, it took them 30 years to try to control the internet. Now they kind of do, but you know, it was at some point. If you look at a place like Wikipedia, right? Or YouTube, if you ignored that Google owned it, it's kind of a communist place in that sense, right? It's a common. So I hope you understand what I'm saying, right? The idea is that capitalism will grow within itself the tools, certain parts of socialism, certain parts of communism, that when the revolution does happen, the workers will have those tools ready, right? They can jump to a new state through things that were built there already. So capitalism is going to grow these solutions to itself, some of them. It's going to grow class consciousness, and then the crisis will come. And when this all comes together, you get a perfect storm and you get the revolution. That's what Marx was hoping for. Did it happen? In some countries. It happened in half the countries in the world. And it's not that it didn't happen in the other, it was stopped, violently stopped in other places. So I just hear my son stole my car keys. That's very, very disconcerting since he's 2 years old. But anyway, we'll see about that later. Okay, so the revolution. Now, the next question is, what happens the day after the revolution, right? What's the revolution doing, really? So let's talk about Marx and communism. Question is, okay, the revolution happened. What now, Carl? What are we going to do? Problem is that Marx doesn't have a good answer to this question. Marx spent most of his time criticizing the current system. He had a vision of what we should do, right? But he never developed a full plan of it. He didn't write a social contract. He didn't write a book like The Republic, like Plato wrote. Like, he didn't write a real blueprint, a real detailed plan of what to do afterwards. All we know is just his general vision from his speeches or from letters he wrote of what he wanted, but he never laid it out. This is not his fault, partly it is his fault, but we can forgive him because he was going to do this. He just died writing it. He was going to write, I think, a fourth book, a follow-up to Capital called The State, which you can predictably says he's going to write about how the state should be, right? But he just died writing the first pages. So we never got that. History was robbed of it. He had a plan. That's one of the biggest mysteries in history. What was Marx's plan? He had a plan, but he died too soon. Cancer got him. What we do know from Communist Manifesto and some of his letters is what he thought communism should be, right? His utopic formulation of communism is an association of free individuals who work with jointly owned means of production and wittingly expend their several living powers as combined social labor power. In other words, we're going to be free. We're going to work with our own means of production. This means the workers own the companies. And they're going to work together to create everything the economy needs, right? So, in very little detail, because we only have little detail, how did he visualize this, knowing that there's no details? Well, in terms of power, it's very likely Marx preferred the democracy because he fought for it. His family was in politics. His daughter was in politics. His son-in-law, who, by the way, was black, talking about progressive man in that time. His son-in-law, Lafargue, was a senator in France. They all participated in this, and Marx was very sympathetic towards democracy. That's probably what he wanted. In economic terms, I already explained this last time, he wanted a society of cooperative producers, right? Society where workers own the factory, where we together, like let's say all teachers in the university own the university. That's how it technically should work, but we have simulation instead. But, right, let's say we live in a world like that. That's what he would want for the economy. So it's still a free market. You still produce stuff for money. The ownership just works different. And in terms of allocation, so what do we do with the money we do have in common, right? But that the state has. Well, he just has general outlines. He has his ethical principle of how to do it. He doesn't have a policy plan, but the ethical principle is the idea of from each according to ability to each according to its need. So we all need to contribute what we can, which means stronger people need to contribute more. And we can each demand what we need. For example, sick people, they need a bit more, right? That's his idea. It's a very Christian idea, right? Christ could have said this, but Marx said it. And the last question is, what's his vision on the state? This is the most mysterious part. So his idea was for the state to take control of things, right? We know that from communism. So the state is going to nationalize everything, but then is going to give it back to the people, form these cooperatives. That historically did not happen in most countries. And then after that happened, after the state gave it all back and people can do it independent, the state is more or less supposed to disappear. It's just going to become less and less important because people are going to be more and more independent and more local, and the state will just wither away, which I have a lot of trouble understanding. It also never happened. I think this is just something he wrote to appeal to anarchists, but anyway, that's a bit mysterious part of it. But this is what we know more or less of what he would have wanted. But again, we don't have a detailed plan because he died too soon. Now, then he died, right? Throat cancer. He dies. What next? A lot of people come to his funeral, and from onwards, we have two main movements that are inspired by him. Two strands, let's say, that come from Marx. Is a big split in the left movement. On the one hand, the one camp, you have democratic socialism, or just socialism, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to explain all of these things in full lectures later, okay? So this is a bit confusing. So this trend, they want to help the working class through political reforms. So to changing the law, to raising the minimum wage, for example, to have better labor regulation, to have a more democratic state, to have less corruption. And they're going to do that by participation in politics. If there's democracy, by winning elections, right? If there's no democracy, by protesting and rioting until you get to democracy. So they're just going to participate in politics. They're going to lay out the plan and hope that people vote for them, supplementing that with strikes, protests, etc. Right? So these are people like Evo Morales, like our president, for example, who fall under this group. Right? Winning elections, populism, etc., changing the laws, making things better for workers. That movement, again, can split into two. You have revolutionary socialism, or evolutionary socialism, depends how you name it. By the way, don't Google any of these concepts, right? I use my own terms here to explain it to you. There's thousands of meanings. Just listen to me and you will understand. Revolutionary socialism does want to get past capitalism, right? It just doesn't want to do it with a revolution. It just doesn't want to do it from one day to the other. But the plan eventually is to get out of this system. It's just going to take the slow road there, the legitimate road, you could say. But it does prepare for communism one day. The other type of socialism doesn't do that, right? This is the one that we are in, for example. It wants to stay in capitalism. It accepts capitalism. It just wants to make it better, higher wages, etc. That's democratic socialism. Bunch of people take that route, mainly in Western Europe. The other group that is inspired by Marx, of his core friends group, become the revolutionary communists. They do not want to change things one by one. They want to change things from today till tomorrow, a complete different change. So their plan is not to participate in elections. They're just waiting for this revolution that Marx promised. And that when it comes, they're going to jump straight from capitalism into communism. That's their plan. You have a lot of variants of this. You have Lenin, who didn't know Marx. Marx didn't really know him. He was just one of his groupies, let's say. And he would come to his house now and then. But Marx would be like, oh, who's that guy? Oh, it's Lenin. Oh, yeah. Oh, well. But you have Leninism, Maoism, anarcho-communism. You have many variants. In this course, I'm mainly going to focus on Leninism because it's the most important one. But again, you have many types of communism. Right? So these are the two things that came from Marxism, from Marx. Now, for some of you, this is going to sound very confusing, right? You have all these different words, socialism, communism, Marxism. What's the difference, right? Most people don't know the difference. That's by design. The mafia de poder wants you to be confused about this. That's why they constantly use these terms amongst each other. That's why you have people protesting for AMLO to stop communism, where Mexico doesn't have communism. You're very used to using these words as if they're the same thing, but they're not. They're different things. And I'm going to try to explain this to you. I'm going to explain this in full lectures on each of them. But until we get there, just to help your thought process, right? I'm going to just explain you on a conceptual level, without going in any detail, just the difference between the words, right? I think this will be useful to a lot of people. Marxism is not a political project. Marxism is not an ideology. Marxism is not a blueprint, a plan for a new society. Marxism is a social science. Marxism is a school of geography, economics, philosophy, sociology, political science, communication science. It's an academic perspective that's critical of capitalism. Right. Marxism is a social science that critically studies the problems of the economy. If you're a Marxist, it means I'm a Marxist. It means you're critical of capitalism and you study it in a similar way than Marx did. So Marxism is a way of thinking about the world. It is not, there's no, there's no Marxist plan, let's say, right? Socialism is a political movement, the biggest one. Socialism is a very broad political movement with thousands of variants, but what all socialists have in common, what the common denominator is of socialism, are two things. One, they're going to try to shift the power away from the elite towards common people, right? It's this populist plan to, well, less power for the mafia de poder, more power for us. That's one of the plans. More power for the worker, thus better wages, right? More bargaining power. That's A. And B, socialists will try to solve the human condition, improve the human condition through common action. We're going to solve problems together through the state. For example, providing public health care as a solution to healthcare problems. That's a socialist idea, right? We all suffer from problems. Instead of you dealing with your own problems, we are going to deal with our problems by coming up with some plan to solve it. All socialists want these two things. Then what is communism? Communism is an extreme variant of this. Communism is a more utopical ideology that really dreams of a totally different world, in which two things happen. One, exploitation ends. Right? Communism seeks to just end capitalist exploitation, therefore end capitalism. B, it wants to organize the economy to meet the needs of all. Nobody should be hungry under communism. Right? We're going to produce not to make money. We're going to produce because we need to produce things so people can use them. Right? In our economy, we produce things to sell them, not because we need them. We produce so many things we don't need, and we don't produce a lot of things that people do need, right? In a communist economy, you would start from what people need. You don't start with supply, right? You start with needs, and you go from there, and you guarantee that. That's what all communists, no matter what variant they are trying to achieve. And they're going to achieve that through social ownership of production, which means that the people own it. There's two variants of this. Either the people own it through the government, that's the communism that we know in history, or the people own it directly through this more Marxist cooperative idea. That's communism. So communism is a, like, like in Pokemon, how they evolve. Communism is like a sort of evolution of socialism, right? But they're not the same thing. Communists are socialists, but most socialists are not communist, right? Now, how does Marx relate to any of this? Well, Marx was a communist. He wrote the Communist Manifesto, which you should have all read by now. But the communism we know in history, the thing we have in Cuba, the thing you had in Soviet Union, in Bulgaria, in Vietnam, this is not the same thing as the thing Marx is writing about. I'm going to explain that in much detail next week, what the differences are between them. But you have to understand that Marx's vision and the thing we got are different. So Marx relates to real existing communism, relates to Cuba, in a way that Christ relates to the modern church. It's inspired on him, yet in both form and substance, they're considerably different, right? You know all of this because you wrote the essay on Christ. You know there's quite a bit of differences between what Christ literally said and what the church does, right? Marx and communism have a similar relationship. It's inspired on him. He's like the patron saint of communism, but they're not the same thing. I hope this helps a bit. If not, I also try to make it visual. Maybe this confuses you more than just ignore this slide. I have a quite graphical way of thinking. So the biggest circle, let's see how good you are with formal logic. The biggest circle is socialism, right? Socialism is the biggest movement. There's a lot of socialists in the world. Some don't know it, but they are. Now, socialism has multiple sources of inspiration. One of them is Marx, but there's other reasons why people are socialists, right? Not all socialists are Marxists. It has many roots. There were socialists before Marx. So you can see that the yellow circle, that's Marxism, is in it, but not all Marxists are socialists. You also have anarchists, for example. Now, within socialism, you have two big variants. You have social democracy, or democratic socialism, or party socialism, or whatever you want to call it. They're all the same thing. These are people who don't plan on, well, most of them don't plan on changing capitalism. They just want to make it better, and they're going to contest elections. They're going to form political parties. Like the Prime Minister of Portugal, for example, is a socialist that won elections. Same with Spain, Italy, etc. These are social democrats. Then we have communists. Communists are also socialists. They just want a more extreme version of it, right? Socialists want to change the power balance between workers and capitalists. Communists just want to abolish the power difference between them. Socialists want to solve collective problems. Communists want to create a whole economy that's based just on that. So communism is a more radical variant of this. It overlaps, they have something in common. Some socialists have sympathy for communism, but and most communists are Marxists. Not all. There's certain parts of communism that are not really based on Marxism, but most of them are, right? So they kind of overlap in this way. I know this is confusing, but it really is confusing in reality. So this is kind of the best I can explain it. Now, I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to stop talking. What questions do you have? What can I explain for you? Or maybe if criticism for me or for Marx. Or maybe you fell asleep. Is anybody home?
I'm here, teacher, but I don't have any questions so far.
Okay. What do you think of Marx's predictions?
Teacher, actually, what you say today about what happens next when the system, the capitalist system. That's what I also thought when I read the Communist Manifest. Like, because he does not explain it, what to do after, or like,
Yes.
so it was Like, okay, the ideas that he gave, and it's all truth, or mostly truth, but then what? Like, if it happens, and the opportunity, if it there is the opportunity and it happens, then what? What's next? So, yeah, that was really interesting.
Uh-huh. So again, like he had a plan, he just died, right? Like Engels had like the notes of his first thing, but he couldn't make it was not enough to make a book out of it, so it never got published. I did, but it was not. It's like it's not serious. But it's not because Marx has no answer that there is no answer, right? Communism did happen. Other people had answers to these questions. Lenin had answers, and we're going to discuss those next week. So there is an answer. It's just not coming from Marx. Let me go to some of the questions that I did get. Sophia says, characteristics of working class. What working class share is that they share neighborhoods, for example, where they live. Working class shares, okay, this is very, I cannot answer your question in minutes because it's a very long answer. But you have something called sociology of class. Different classes have a different culture and have different tastes, for example. They like different things. Upper class, middle class, and lower class, working class, consistently have the same tastes in things. It goes from colors to music to sports. You might never thought of that, but it's if you would put in statistics, you would survey people. There's a large overlap. So working class has similar tastes, has similar things they like, have a similar vision on art, for example, on what type of culture, what type of programs they would like to see on TV. And that can grow over time. While poor people are just there because they're poor, right? You could be a billionaire and then lose everything and then you're poor, but that doesn't mean you share any kind of reference with the other poor people. Let's see what other questions you got. Yeah, really. You want to say so? Well, let me go to. Okay, you're ready. Please
Yeah.
tell me.
Did Engel, well, in the preface, in the prologue, uh, Engels wrote some notes and also stated that he wrote some notes in the whole book. Did he didn't like add the little notes that Marx had at the moment of what should happen next.
Because they were not complete. And Engels was dying himself. Like these were old men, so he just didn't get enough years. And you have to. So Capital, his main work, right, took 10 years to write. So whatever notes he has, this doesn't compare at all to what a real book of Marx looks like. He also had notes of Capital 15 years before he wrote it, but they were really different from the final product. So that's my understanding of it. Somebody have some question? If you say anti-capitalist, does it make you Marxist? That depends. If you understand why you're anti-capitalist, yes. Like Marxism is smart anti-capitalism. If it's just an emotion, or if you're nihilistic, you think that nothing matters, then no, you're not a Marxist. You're a Marxist if you understand Marx. What do you think about the abolition of heritage? It comes together with another question that Javier had, right? Abolition of marriage and of inheritance. Well, communists see marriage as a kind of oppressive and mainly economical relationship, so they're more for free love. I would understand it as that. Again, this isn't that time, right, when marriage was super unequal. Abolition of heritage, this is not necessarily a communist idea. Real, pure capitalists, if they're pure of heart, would also be for the abolition of heritage. Because heritage messes up the whole game. Like the whole game of capitalism, on theory, it's all a lie, but on theory, is that you work hard, right? And you compete, and if you're the best, you're gonna win. None of this works if you introduce heritage into this, right? Because most rich people were born rich. This idea of the self-made man is one of the biggest lies in society. This doesn't happen. Maybe it happens. I calculate for 0.18% of people it happens. Okay, but in general, as I told you a while back, only 3% of people in the top 20% are not born in the top 20%, right? Inheritance just destroys the whole logic of capitalism. So if you take out, you have an actual fair competition between people because everybody would start from the same level. Now we are so used to a system of inheritance that this is kind of hard to think about and a bit scary if you would think about it, right? But if it would have never existed, everybody would have more money because the money would be, like a lot of stuff. If you just imagine the government would have all inheritance, like almost everything would be for free, etc., etc. Abolishing that today is a bit more problematic, right? But if once you have communism, and you don't need to worry about money that much anymore, abolishing inheritance, I think, makes a lot more sense. And the other thing's marriage. I don't know about that. Susanna. Well, the question is, or the challenge is for you, why do you think in communism people could not compete, could not try to do their best?
I mean, they will compete, but at the end of the day, I believe that we're going to be ending on the same capitalist problems because of that. Like, on communism, there's going to be a point in which people will not be satisfied with their lives and will want more because sometimes people can get greedy. And the communist system will end up being, again, a capitalist system with some changes. So I think that's why at the end of the day it won't completely work because it's not going to be enough for some people. And we have to take into consideration that they have been on a capitalist system, so they kind of know already what are some of the benefits of this system, and as well as some of the negative ideas that it goes with it.
Yeah, that's something you could say. One question to that is, why did we live 40,000 years without capitalism if it somehow is natural to us? But yes, indeed, once it's hard to make a switch from that to the other, right? And we don't need to. I'm not even advocating this. I'm just explaining Marx. Right. All right, I'm going over my time, dear students, and I'm sorry for that. You have other classes to attend. I'll read your thoughts on this in your homeworks. And I'll see you next week for a little bit more Marx. And then we're finally done with it. Then we're switching back to the right. I promise you. No more left-wing nonsense. But next Monday is still Marx. All right? So enjoy your week, what remains of it, and take care.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you,
Bye.
teacher.
Have a good day.
Thank you.